everybody. Welcome to the Underwater Photography Show. My name is Matthew Sullivan.
And I'm Alex Mustard.
And today we are going over what Alex is shooting going into 2024. So let's start with your housing and camera, Alex.
Well, I have to say, if we'd done this in January 23, I'd have been like, yeah, Nikon D850 for the next couple of years. Nothing's going to change in underwater photography. And this time last year, I headed off to the Cayman Islands. And that evil man, Ryan Cannon, said to me, would you like to try a Sony A7R5 for a couple of dives? And I just loved it. I just love, first day or so, a bit of getting used to shooting mirrorless from SLR. And I just came, but after that on that trip, that's the camera I used. And I came back from that trip and just had a really big think. I was like, damn, there's a camera out there I prefer shooting to the camera I own. And that was, quite a shock to me. So I sort of then, for the next month or two, had to think about what camera I might do. Would I wait for Nikon to announce the Z8? Would I, look at the Sony, look at the Canon? I had a good look at all the options. Didn't feel I had to stick with Nikon. I don't have any, specific loyalty there other than being a long-term user. Felt that Sony, obviously Sony were making the sensors in my Nikon cameras, so I had plenty of confidence in the quality of the sensors. And decided to go to the Sony A1 camera. And I think the main clincher there was, it's obviously, one of Sony's absolute top cameras. For them, it's their top of the range beast. But what attracted me as an underwater photographer, it was one of the few cameras that had a little bit of tech in it that was extending my capability. And that was the fact that I could shoot flash sync at a 400th of a second native. And that was just a really exciting feature on that camera. I prefer the subject recognition tracking of the A7R5 slightly over the A1. The A1 has got a tremendous autofocus speed. It's just not quite as hot, I don't think, on the subject recognition, but it's a beast and it's a workhorse. I actually bought the camera secondhand. I didn't buy it new. It wasn't a new camera at that time, and there were plenty on the secondhand market with very, very light use, particularly on the shutter, because it's got an electronic shutter as well. I know Nikon make a lot of fuss about the electronic shutter on their Z8, Z9. Well, the A1 has got a Z8, Z9 in it, and you can have a bit more megapixels and better autofocus, and then have a mechanical shutter when you need it as well, to get that extra sync speed, which as an underwater photographer is a big attraction. So I'm shooting a Sony A1, and I have it in a Nauticam housing, which I can wave around to you now. Just swing it in. I really like the Sony because it's small. I've actually got a photo of on my phone of the Sony A1 camera body sitting in between a Nikonos 5 and a Nikonos 3. And it's smaller than the Nikonos 5 and slightly bigger than the Nikonos 3. And I was showing the guys in the pub the other day, and they were laughing. They couldn't believe how small it is. And on my workshops, I always like to tease the Olympus Micro Four Thirds photographers about how big their cameras are. So I love the small size. If I was a land photographer, I may not like that small size of the Sony, but if it's going in a housing, the smaller the better almost.
So I know you used to shoot the D4, D5s. How do the ergonomics on the smaller housings compare to the big pro-bodied cameras? Because I always liked the ergonomics on those bigger housings.
Yeah, so I would say the biggest advantage of those big body housings is the housings tend to be very neutral in themselves. Dome ports tend to float a little bit, so housings typically tip up this way. Those bigger bodies, and particularly that extra sort of volume in the housing in this area here, definitely makes the housing a little bit nicer to shoot. My D5 housing was made by Subel, and it was an absolute tank of a housing. You just felt that whatever you threw at it, it would work the same as it did on day one. And it was definitely a lot more of a tank than my D850 housing was from Subel. That D5 was made just for heavy workload. Big, chunky, hardcore engineering in it, and it was an absolute pleasure to shoot. And I actually made the mistake on one trip. I took both of them on the trip, and the D850's got better sensor than the D5. But the D5 housing was so nice to shoot. I just kept shooting the D5, and then I came home going, should have been shooting the D850 more. The highlights aren't held as well. The colors aren't as rich, obviously, half the megapixels. So yeah, if I took them both together, I'd always use the D5 because it was a pleasure to shoot. Anyway, back on the Sony. What I like about the Sony cameras is that although they're a small camera, Nauticam prioritized the ergonomics of the housing over keeping it absolutely tiny. So it's noticeably smaller than an SLR housing. It's noticeably smaller than a Nikon or a Canon mirrorless housing. But although the camera is smaller than a lot of the Olympus Micro Four Thirds mirrorless cameras, the Nauticam Sony housings are bigger than the Olympus housings. They gave them the space to make sure they were fully featured, properly ergonomic, and I really love features about this housing. Nauticam a long time ago just optimized wonderfully the primary controls of aperture shutter speed. I always shoot a Nauticam. I think it's one of Nauticam's best accessories is this strap.
Yep.
If you want to shoot a camera one-handed, you need a strap on it, so that you can reach around and shoot it properly one-handed. And this is a really cheap thing, and hardly anyone has them on their housings. They're such a rare accessory, and it's a crazy thing that people don't buy them. And so anyone who's got a Nauticam housing or any brand of housing, look to get a proper strap on the handle. It just allows you to shoot one-handed, and it's it should be essential on all housings, not of any brand. I like about this housing very much the fact that Nauticam have got this really nice directional control that actually connects to the very tiny little joystick on the back of the camera. So that little joystick on the back of the camera in the housing, you've got this great, really attractive, nice circular dial for moving around, and that's great for moving autofocus points. You can also navigate menus through it and everything like that. And obviously a factor that we all love about mirrorless cameras, and I know it's not a mirrorless episode, is that you can do everything through this viewfinder.
Yep.
So if I need to navigate menus in the middle of shooting a subject, I don't have to push the camera away from my body. I can just do everything, and those controls falling to your fingertips are so important for doing all of that work through the EVF while you're shooting. Other things that I like about it is I've actually got a slightly custom job on my housing. I was talking to Nauticam about some things that they might introduce in future housings, and we were just playing around with ideas. And they sent me an idea to try, which was one of the issues on the Sony cameras is that the ISO button is tucked away on the 5-way button on the back, the 4-way button on the back. And it's a little bit of a reach around on a housing to press that button. And I was keen that while maintaining that control, because it's obviously also important for menu access, whether they could actually have two buttons pressing the same control on the back of the housing so that you could then have a more ergonomic position, particularly for the ISO. Now, I know you can program the custom buttons to be ISO, but the camera's got the word ISO written on the back, and moving it away from that button doesn't seem the most sensible. So I thought it would be good if Nauticam had a look at a solution to that. So both this button here, which is I can reach very comfortably with my thumb, and this button next to it, which is just out of reach, both actually press the same button inside the housing. And this one here is written ISO on it on the back of my housing.
Nice.
So that's one thing of interest. Another feature that I really love about this particular housing is the bigger viewfinders that I'm probably in the way of the mic now. The bigger viewfinders that Nauticam have introduced in recent years, because the EVFs on the back of the mirrorless cameras are physically bigger than the viewfinders on the SLRs. So these bigger generation of viewfinders really make a difference to that. If you don't want to invest in one of these, be aware that on a lot of the mirrorless cameras, you can make that EVF shrink physically, so it doesn't fill the whole screen. And so you can always make your EVF smaller and then use an old style viewfinder on many of the cameras. It's a bit hidden away in the menus, but you can have that. You can have a shrunk view on the EVF, which can save you money until you can afford that upgrade, or if you're just using the straight viewfinder. I personally don't hardly ever use the LCD screen on the camera. The only time I use it is if I'm shooting straight down or straight up, and sometimes I remember to switch to it if I'm shooting away from my body. But when I'm shooting away from my body, I'm often just shoot it blind anyway, and I don't even try and look at it. If I do want to switch between EVF and LCD, it's C3 on the way I have my camera set up, so very easy to do. I know what's caught your eye already is what I have on the front of this housing today to show to you. And it's caught your eye because not many people have one because it's not available yet. And this is the full production version of the Nauticam FCP, which we'll definitely talk about once I've shot it underwater. I've been shooting the prototype version of it through the second half of last year, and it's a hugely capable lens. It's a dream focal range for anyone shooting wide angle underwater. It's not a surprise that it's incredibly usable. And this is the full production version. I'm not a fan of reviewing things until I've tried them, but I know I'm going to love this because I've lent the prototype to so many photographers last year that I've been diving with, and everyone just comes back from the first dive with it and just like, yeah, that's what I want. It's, it just does everything in one go. You can do everything you want. You've got tremendous flexibility, and yeah, I'm really excited to be trying this in the next couple of weeks when I get away into the water. So that's kind of my camera and housing. It's obviously not the only port I have on it, but it's the one that I've got on today. A quick overview of my Sony lenses might be valuable to people. With the FCP and with the WACP WWL series of lenses, I use the Sony 28-60. I've come to Sony from Nikon, so if I want to use a normal fisheye lens, I'm currently using a Nikon 8-15mm lens on a monster adapter. I think if you're starting from scratch, and you want a fisheye lens, the Canon 8-15 is a better option, just because the adapters are more mature products. The monster adapter's got a few rough edges still, but it works fine, and optically it's great. There's no harm in using it. It's just not quite as slick as a Metabones or something on a Canon lens. I don't own a rectilinear lens for the Sony. With the coverage range of the FCP and the WACPs, I've got that whole field of view range covered. And yes, there's the occasional subject I wish I had something a little bit more rectilinear in look, but not really very much. I'm not a big fan of rectilinear lenses, as you'll soon learn on the episodes coming up. So that's kind of the camera and the housing. I have, I was running through lenses, wasn't I? Sorry. I love the 28-60. And when I went to Galapagos this year, I just took the 28-60 and I took the FCP and the WACP, and that was it. One lens, two different underwater solutions for it. There's no split levels really in Galapagos. I didn't need a dome or anything like that. Just a, really, really nice system, hugely capable, great optics. It was a really, really nice setup. I really like the Sony 90mm lens, the macro lens. For a long time, for 10 years or more, Nikon 105 on full frame was how I saw the macro world. And it's just really nice to have a different focal length. I'm really enjoying just everything being just slightly different, slightly wider, slightly closer. And it's not a better or worse. It's just, for me, it's great. I shot so many subjects with the 105 focal length. It's just nice to shoot with a slightly different focal length. I've recently bought the Sony 50mm lens, which I don't recommend anyone else buys. But for me, I see a real value in it. The reason I say that is it's a very slow focusing lens, to the point of real annoyance. Even on the A1, that's like the fastest focusing camera I've ever used, and the 50 still. But if your target are larger macro subjects that don't move, and in a lot of muck diving destinations, like Lembe, like Analau, wherever you're going, there's a lot of subjects that are, fist size or small, that sort of size range. The 90 is a little bit too tight for that. So that slow focusing 50mm, if it's a frogfish, it's not going anywhere. Slow focus is not the end of the world. I wouldn't use it for fish portraits. I've not been brave enough to try it for blackwater diving, but I really like the 90 for blackwater diving actually. But the 50 I think has a role to play, and I actually use that both with a flat port and with a curved port that Nauticam make, which they call the 4-inch port, which is really nice because it keeps it really wide, because you don't have that cut down of shooting through a flat port. So those are kind of my main options. I have a number of special other options. We'll be covering it in an episode relatively soon, but I have, for my Nikon days, or my Nikonos days, a Nikonos RS autofocus 13mm lens, which Isaac, a friend of yours, is converting for me to use on the Sony. So I'm looking forward to having that capability. I have a Nikonos 5, so this is a completely manual lens, 15mm wide angle, which I've shot quite a bit underwater. It's not very wide. The Nikonos 15mm wide angle, although it's optically great, it's only as wide as a 20mm lens. So it's a 90-degree lens, but it's super sharp, and it's really nice to shoot with the mirrorless camera. The mechanical side, you don't really miss a lot with a with a wide-angle lens. I have Trioplan 100, which is very nice to shoot on the Sony because the focus peaking it just solves all the focus issues with that lens. It's not a sharp lens, the Trioplan 100. It's a lens you use because it creates quite interesting and distorted bokehs. And it's actually because of that distorted nature, it's quite hard to judge the focus on it. But with focus peaking through the mirrorless camera, I would say I've gone from a 4 out of 10 shots that were really, really sharp to 9 out of 10. Transforms its usability. So I really like that lens. I haven't quite got my extension tube set up right for it. So on my last trip, I had the focus a bit too far away from the camera. So I just need to have a little tweak on its setup. But I'm really, really happy about using that. And I also have Nauticam. It's only on loan, but Nauticam made a mechanical 13mm fisheye. For which is again a purely mechanical lens, but that mounts on the Sony as well, and that's got fantastic water contact optics, but it's purely mechanical. So you're again mechanical aperture, mechanical focus, and you have to be careful. But again, like the 15mm Nikonos lens, once you've got that mechanical focus set, it's really easy to use. And it's nice and small, and so I like that. So I use that. I think that's pretty much what I'm shooting with it. Did I talk about the EMWL or not? I can't remember.
I was going to ask if you didn't volunteer it.
Yeah, sorry. You got me talking about stuff I'm excited about, so I'm not shutting up. I am also a big fan of Nauticam's EMWL lens, and I really love the 160 optic. I have generally been shooting it this year in this form. So instead of having the relay section in the middle of the EMWL, I have a flipping viewfinder for it. And I either shoot it like this with the flipping viewfinder, and it's really nice to shoot. Just be aware when you use it this way that all your autofocus, if you're moving the autofocus point, you have to move it the opposite direction to what you're thinking. And all your menus through your EVF are flipped the wrong way around. So if you want to make a quick change, you have to know what you're doing, or you switch the camera onto the LCD and then you can read them the right way around. But I've just learned to do everything backwards. It's pretty easy. I do also dive with the 90mm with just this bit in my pocket. And the reason I do that is occasionally you'll bump into a great EMWL subject when shooting normal macro. And I'll put this on. And when I shoot it like that, I will never look through the viewfinder. I find if I've been shooting normal macro and I go to a flipped screen on this, it's too hard. You just can't get it right. Much better to simply maneuver this in front of the subject by looking over the top. And the shots are great. It's like, you don't need to look through.
It's wide enough, like a fisheye, that you don't really have to necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, and you're so close that you can't be wrong if you're there. And okay, maybe you might not quite get the background where you want it to be, but you shoot a few shots, and the Sony autofocuses through this perfectly. I just trust the autofocus, and it's fine. It's perfect. So that's kind of most of my gear, I think.
What is we can talk about this in a future episode too, but what's your preferred autofocus mode for the EMWL, since I know that's been a topic of conversation?
So yeah, on the Sony, I find it's really, really good. I think probably use the Zone 1 the most, because I think that, particularly when I'm shooting blind, because I'm not sure of the position. I'll probably go to, I'll probably use the tracking spot, if not, because it just allows me to get it roughly right, and then I can just always move it slightly, focus, and then just recompose a little bit, which I think often works with a moving subject, because when you're working with this, even a nudibranch is kind of moving quite quickly relative to this. So probably a tracking spot if I'm looking through it, and zone if I'm shooting blind, because I think you're not. I think zone gives it a bit more scope for working. I do use the subject recognition a little bit underwater, but I have it on the housing for quick on and off. So actually on my housing, I don't shoot video. I use the record button for subject recognition on and off. So if I'm working a subject and think, subject recognition will do well on this, on it goes. And if I'm using subject recognition and it's messing up, I can just don't go through any menus, just hit this and off it goes. And I think that's a really nice way to use the housing. I didn't talk about lights.
I was going to say, let's talk about the flashes. What are you using these days?
So for the last few years, I've been using the Retra flashes. I still try, the other flash guns that are around. I am not the biggest fan of the proliferation of lithium batteries. It does concern me. I know it's sort of become a news item, but there've been lots of liveaboards for lots of years, and it just seems to be there's a lot more fires on liveaboards than there used to be. And what's changed in diving in the last few years, and it's the amount of stuff that people are taking on boats to charge, particularly with those lithium batteries. So I'm happy at the moment to be using a Strobe with sort of double A's in it, and I really like the Retras from that perspective. For a long time I was using the CCAM flash guns, and basically once I started using the Retras, they were an absolute sort of like for like match for me in terms of the light, but in a unit that's half the size. And what I really like about the Retras is that if I'm on a macro trip or a cold water diving trip, a shore diving trip, I don't want them to be too big or too heavy. I take them like this. And if I want that extra battery power performance, it's big wide angle in blue water, I'll put the extra 4 batteries in, double up the size of it. And I really like that you basically have 2 strobes in one, because to be honest, when in the years I was shooting the C-cams, when I was going to Lembe, I wasn't taking the C-cams, I was taking in on Z240s. So now I have one strobe that I use on all my trips, and it's modifiable for those different types of shooting. And I really like that, because while people love to use, their big wide angle strobes for macro, they limit where you can position those strobes. And, I would love these to be shorter still. I've always said, strobes should be shaped like cake tins, not beer cans. And I think that's, so they are growing a little bit longer, and I do think the newer ones are slightly longer still. But yeah, I really like the Retras. I think they're doing a good job. But I keep trying all the other flash guns, and it's also why I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on the new Kraken flash as well, just because, underwater photographers obsess about cameras and sometimes housings, and it's light that makes a difference in our photos. And I will always, no compromise. I think, I've always refused sort of, to be sort of a big ambassador for any of the brands, because my photography is too important to me, and particularly my lighting. And I always say to them, if I'm using your gear, you can tell everyone, but I don't want to be linked with any brand officially. You can say, I'm using your gear and everything, but I will always gravitate to the gear I want to use. I want to do underwater photography to the best I can. There's loads and loads of talented photographers, and I don't want to be shooting with what I feel is inferior gear. So I will gravitate to what I feel is the best gear at that time. And this is great for the manufacturers that I collaborate with, because they know if I'm using, they know that the people who I interact with in underwater photography trust me as a source. I'm not using gear because someone's paying me to use it, or paying me to say it's great, or I'm not allowed to say anything bad about it. And in fact, I have the housing from Nauticam, and they don't want me writing articles on their website. They want me using their gear, talking honestly about it, saying what I like, what I don't like, telling them as well so they can improve it. But I'm sort of, try to be a independent voice on these things.
What version of the Retra flash do you have right there?
This is this is a Retra Pro Max internals in a Retra Pro body. So this time, back at the end of 2022, Retra were developing the Pro Max, and they gave me a pair of Pro Max internals in Pro bodies, and I shot those from last Christmas all the way through last year to the middle of the year. And then they gave me some pre-production Pro Maxes, which I shot from the summer to the end of the year. And just before Christmas, I actually sent the Pro Maxes back to them and said, they're working fine, but I know that these are not, put together properly on the production line. They're soldered, there's bits of them that were hand put together for me to test. And I want some proper ones, please. so yeah, in the new year, I'm going to get some actual production line Pro Maxes, rather than ones put together by the engineers by hand. Much as I love, bespoke hand done engineering, I think properly printed, circuit boards and things are a bit more reliable. So they still worked all the way through. And actually, I've got some other prototypes that I've actually got a prototype of the original Pro that Retra said would probably last about 6 to 8 weeks, and it still works. like 3 years later. They like, and there's like use it until it breaks and then send it back, and it's never broken. And they're like, it can't last this long. The way we built it to, because they do a lot of reliability, and that's what the other reason I like the Retras actually is they just don't go wrong. They are
I have a pair of originals from 2017 that are still kicking, no problem.
Yeah, so. I've still got originals as well. Yeah. So I think the only thing I don't like about them is I think as they've evolved, they've evolved a little bit more towards clear water photography. And I would and it's the difficulty is that I love having a single strobe to use for everything, but I do feel that if you make a strobe better for wide angle, it probably comes slightly less good for macro. Yeah. It comes slightly a bit less good for, they've probably just migrated a little bit more towards wide angle, but not enough that I'd ever want to have a second strobe. So I think that's kind of all the gear.
Right on. Well, we could talk about this all day, but that seems like it's probably a pretty good place to wrap up. So thank you everybody for watching, and we will see you guys in the next one.